Good morning, afternoon, or evening, and welcome to the Bloody Disgusting Network. The following show is just horrifying. Beware.
We're gonna carry on and plan the sequel, because let's face it, baby, these days, you gotta have a sequel.
And welcome back to Microqueers. It's your bi-weekly queer horror short roundup, and I'm Joe.
And I'm Trace, and we're going to be discussing Rose McGowan's short film Dawn, which, really hits you over the head with that one.
It's not at all what you expect, right?
I mean, it's interesting. I watched it twice in preparation for this. So I watched it the first time, and I was like, oh man, that's heavy. And I actually forgot that it starts with an in media res scene, and I was like, that's weird that I forgot that happened.
It's relatively brief, yeah. And maybe before we get too far into it, folks, if you haven't seen the short, Dawn is about a quiet young teenager who longs for something or someone to free her from her sheltered life. And oh boy, if that description isn't, it's a bit misleading.
Well, I mean, she is freed from her sheltered life.
Oh dear. That's not very nice at all, is it?
No, it's not. No, but so again, this is directed by Rose McGowan, but I also do think we should point out that the writers of this short, it's M.A. Fortin and Joshua John Miller, aka the queer partner duo who also wrote The Final Girls. And it's a bit of a tonal shift.
Yeah, it's got the darker elements of The Final Girls in it. I won't lie, when I added this to the list, I completely forgot why it was on there. So I was watching it kind of trying to keep an eye out, thinking, okay,
for queerness.
Where's the queerness here? And then when I started to research it, I realized
it's the writers.
It's the writers, but also I love that there's some queer references woven in here with Tab Hunter and Rock Hudson being the voices of teenage sexual experience.
I thought the exact same thing, and the timing is perfect too, because we just covered Psycho 3, about 2 months ago maybe, and had a discussion about Anthony Perkins and Tab Hunter there. And I had watched the documentary Tab Hunter Confidential for that recording, but it was so funny when she's reading the magazine about, what does Tab Hunter look for in a date? And I was like, I know the secrets about all that.
Is it a penis? Is that what he's looking for? That's only a joke because often closeted gay stars were forced to do editorials like this to protect their interests. So I'm laughing, but it's actually very, very sad.
Yeah, I mean, he seemed fine. Like it's. I mean, again, this isn't what the short's about, but it's one of those things where it's like, it was just how life was, which is really shitty for back then. But like, because that's how it was, at least in Tab Hunter's case, he was fine. He seemed fine with it.
Yes, Rock Hudson, not so much. He became a raging alcoholic.
Yeah, for sure. But moving back to Dawn. So yeah, I mean, this is it's about 15 minutes long, and it's very I was gonna say bubblegummy because there actually is bubblegum in a centerpiece of the short.
Yes.
It's very bright and pretty, set in, I'm assuming, the 50s or 60s, probably.
It's 61, apparently.
61. And I really, really dug this. Okay, so this came out in 2014, right? This is pre-Me Too movement, which is that is an important context to put it in, because we both know that Rose McGowan has been a loud voice in the Me Too movement.
Correct, yes.
And I do wonder, because at first I was thinking, like, well, is this like autobiographical? Because even though, I mean, spoiler alert, everyone, Dawn is, killed at the end of this short.
Yes.
It's very much like this innocent girl, losing her innocence, and she makes one wrong decision and can't get out of it, and she pays the consequences as her abusers or murderer gets off scot-free. And I can't help but wonder if one of the reasons McGowan took this film is because it's a story that's familiar to her in her personal life.
Yeah, I mean, sort of problematic figure aside, with her, her struggles with mental health and some of the other things that have come out in the wake of her correct allegations against Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah.
Rose McGowan has always been a very vocal feminist, and I think she's been interested in particularly cinema that has depicted female safety and issues of protectiveness. And I love the dichotomy here with the bubblegum aesthetic of this perfect white upper middle class house mixed with the kind of rough and tumbleness of this greaser guy who works at the gas station. And I think it is very telling. I think you can definitely read some autobiographical elements into here. And I think that makes the short richer as a result.
I agree. I mean, again, even with that aesthetic you're talking about, then we get such a dark ending for it. Like that contrast is, I feel like, very, very apparent. And yeah, it's just really rough. And, you know, the actress that plays Dawn, Tara Lynn Barr, I'm familiar with her on a Hulu TV show called Casual.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a great show. Her character goes up and down in terms of likability.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it, yeah.
Yeah. But I will say, yeah, it was really nice seeing her in this role. But oof, it did not hit hard when she's sitting there begging to go home. It is just...
Yeah, and I can't remember what episode we talked about, but it was our Patreon episode for the recent Wrong Turn remake, where I talked about my discomfort with characters being made to disrobe in violent situations, and I really didn't like it how she was just kind of left not wearing a dress and pleading to have her dress back so that she could feel safe and not being allowed. Ugh.
Well, I mean, again, like this may be a bit of a reach too, but even with the queer aspect, I was also thinking if the other female in the cast, who is played by Hannah Marks, if her desire to switch dresses, if there wasn't like, I mean, again, it might be a bit of a reach, but like just like some kind of queer subtext there between them and how she wanted to switch dresses, or if it was just like, oh, I like your dress, give it to me before you get blood all over it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely also thought that a little bit, like just there's a bit of a flirty vivaciousness to that character. I read it a bit more as, hey, rich girl, I want to try on your life because I don't have the same kind of assets and privilege as you do. And also, I know you're going to get blood on it.
So I'm halfway. Oh my God, I'm half white. I'm half right.
Terrible. So interesting to note that in the interviews that Rose McGowan did for this film, because this debuted at Sundance and apparently got rave reviews and not at all sexist reviews from a lot of critics who said, oh, we didn't know she had this in her. We didn't think that she was going to be capable of delivering a film like this because she's not a director.
Silly woman.
Yeah, basically. Which she retorted being like, I've spent 50,000 hours on film sets, so yes, I've got a film education. Love it.
I mean, she's not afraid to check anyone. That's for sure.
No. But I thought it was interesting that she referenced 3 particular inspirations for this film. So she said part of the aesthetic, and I think we've talked about this in the bubblegum slickness of the house, is the original Parent Trap.
Oh, okay. I can see that.
Yeah, that one I think is very clear.
Well, the living room specifically, like, is very reminiscent of that.
And then she also said the tension of Night of the Hunter, which we have had conversations about offline. It's a movie I watched last year. Absolutely love it. And it's a movie that you have indicated that you want to track down and watch because you've heard so much about it.
I do own it now. I have that Criterion Blue. I just got to pop it in.
There you go. Okay. And the final element is the loneliness of an Edward Hopper painting, which is a reference that I personally do not know. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought there was more to that.
No, sorry. It was just those 3. But interesting to note in the Hollywood Reporter sort of recap of how this all went down in terms of the reception and what she was planning to do with this, because she actually really wanted to get an Oscar nomination for a short film for this. And the Hollywood Reporter piece actually describes this as Douglas Sirk meets David Lynch. And I thought that was a very astute observation.
See, I see the Douglas Sirk in it. I don't necessarily know if I see the Lynch, but I think that's because I associate a lot of like kind of fragmented narratives with David Lynch, like something a bit more abstract that this is not.
Right. So I think a lot of people Specifically with regards to things like Twin Peaks and Blue Velvet, they'll talk
Mm-hmm.
about the dirty, grimy messiness that hides under civilized society, particularly in
Mm.
the
Okay.
suburban lifestyle. So I think the suggestion that, even at the end of the short, when the guy who murders her reveals his motivation, and it's literally just he wanted to see what it felt like.
Well, okay, yeah, I want to talk about that too because you know we have a two gay men writing a short story that's directed by a woman,
Mhm.
and we always talk about how the horror genre gets complaints about misogyny lobby against it. And granted, there isn't a lot of torture that we see on screen, like outside of them throwing a rock at her head and her begging like to be let go.
Right.
But I think that's an interesting way to take it. But yeah, I was just, again watching this like, oh, like is it a statement on men? Like, and I think that's why it's important we have the female villain in the group with them.
I think so too.
But just, or is it like society in general, where it's like I'm bored with my life, and so I want to just see what it feels like to kill somebody. And there's also that lack of motive there. That you know me, I want to bring Scream into it because
Of course you do.
well, and there's the line that Dawn has where she says, my mother's going to be so mad at me, and I don't know if it was intentional or not, but it reminds me so much of Matthew Lillard's delivery of my mom and dad are going to be so mad at me. And
Yeah.
given who the writers are and how familiar they are, and we know they are with the
And
horror
the
genre,
actress from Scream.
exactly, I cannot help but think
Mhm.
like that was an intentional thing, an intentional inclusion in this short.
Right. No, I think it's entirely possible. I definitely read this mostly as a class based short. So
Hmm.
poor people who go after the middle to upper class girl. But I think to do so is also to sell it a little bit short because visually it's a great looking short. It's acted really well. But I think specifically just the deconstruction of what this girl's life is like and particularly coming from a Hollywood actress who has a bit of
Hmm.
a troubled past or like
Yeah.
has grown up in the industry and has probably experienced all kinds of violence and protection at the hands of men. And I'm saying protection
Hmm.
with quotation marks.
Right. No, for sure. Well, so what do you I don't know, what do you think this film is trying to say then? Like I guess that's where I was kind of going with like what like a statement on humanity, like we're
Mhm.
bored and whatever. So is this a nihilistic film to you?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, if you look at it strictly from a class-based argument, it's like, okay, well, rich people better watch out because, poor people are going to eat you.
Mhm.
But I think more to the point, it's that there's a certain kind of ennui that can lead to madness and violence. Like basically under civilization, we are all hungry for blood. We all want to
Yeah.
climb that corporate ladder. We all want to get ahead, but also we want to feel something. And suburbia and domesticity and roles that we are assigned to play can be very stifling. So that's how I read particularly that final line and their motivation.
Well, and also the time period too, right? Like this is like oh god, when Rebel Without a Cause is like the 50s, right? But we're kind of
Yes.
getting into that like, teenage rebellion thing. And so
Hmm.
well, okay, would you watch a feature-length version of this?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, 100%.
Would you end it like so? Okay, would it be more like Dawn's journey, and then it still ends the same way, or is the ending of this short like I don't know, like the middle of the first act or something, or sorry, the middle of the film?
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of tantalizing opportunities. Like I can imagine what this would be like if Dawn is kind of like your Janet Leigh character, right? And then she's killed off and then maybe the rest of the film becomes her parents trying to hunt these killers down or even
Yeah,
like some kind of court trial, particularly if it's in the 60s where we're talking about repression and conservatism, then I think it would make a lot of sense. But part of me would like to see I don't know. I would want to see Dawn at least get more screen time at the very minimum.
right. Well, I mean, and it's called Dawn, so it's
Right.
like, but again, that could be a really fun misdirect where it's like, oh, your title character gets killed, or
Mhm.
even in the case of Rebecca, where it's like, oh, your title character's not on screen
Yeah.
at all for the
She's
entire
dead the whole
runtime.
time.
That has been Dawn, everybody. Listeners, and viewers, I guess. Let us know what you thought of this short. What were your reads? I mean, because again, like I think there's a lot to unpack here, and our reading is most likely not the only one you can gather from this.
Yeah. Yeah. This is pretty open. I think people can take a lot of different things away from this. So,
Yeah. And let us know what you thought, and let us know what you want to see from a feature-length version. But until our next episode of Micro Queers, we can cross out Dawn.
Yes, and cross out Micro Queers because you stole my line, you dick.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, okay.
Hello, I'm Shelby Scott, the host of Scare You to Sleep, a podcast where I tell you spooky bedtime stories full of creepy sound effects and music that is soothing yet unsettling to help immerse you into a world of horror. This is a show for those of us who have realized horror can be a strange but relaxing escape from reality. Speaking of escapes, sometimes I lead you through guided nightmares, like a guided meditation, but instead of flowery meadows, I take you on a journey through your own personal nightmare. So come get lost in the terror with me. Listen to Scare You to Sleep wherever you listen to podcasts, or find us online at bloody.fm. Sweet screams.